Eastern Europe, January to June 1944. The Soviet success in the 1943 continues into the new year. The siege of Leningrad is lifted by the end of January, almost 3 years after it started. Ukraine and Galicia are captured, and in March the Germans are forced to evacuate the Crimean Peninsula. Odessa and Sevastopol are liberated in April and May. On the 9th of June, Operation Bagration is launched to retake Belarus. 166 Soviet divisions with approximately 2,700 Soviet tanks advanced on the 38 German divisions of the Army Group Center, initially capturing Minsk in early July. July 1944, with a breakthrough expected further south in the Balkans, the German forces are hard pressed along the entire front. Hitler orders the deployment of the Totenkorps to stem the Soviet tide. Faced with the impending destruction at the hands of the Soviets, the German army balks less at the use of the Totenkorps than before, focusing instead on the impact on their hated enemy. Almost immediately, the Soviet army halts, and in the window of opportunity it presents, the German army reorganizes and solidifies their defensive lines. August 1944. Early August sees the uprising of the Polish Home Army in Warsaw. Stalin chooses not to support the efforts of the Poles, and the Germans unleash the Totenkorps and Waffen-SS in a brutal suppression of the uprising. Despite brave resistance from the Polish Home Army under the command of General Komorowski, it is effectively destroyed by mid-September. German reprisals are even harsher. Warsaw is leveled, and many thousands of Poles are killed as the Germans form their defensive lines around what's left of the city. September 1944. When the Finns announce a ceasefire with the Soviet Union, the Germans respond with an evacuation of forces from Finland into Norway and Denmark. Initial cooperation between the Finns and the Germans eventually gives way to sporadic and uncoordinated hostilities. October 1944. Soviet progress in the Baltic and Poland effectively grinds to a halt in the face of entrenched German resistance, the threat of the Totenkorps, and Polish resistance activity in reprisal for the Soviet Union's inactivity during the Warsaw Uprising. The ruins of Warsaw become the focus of the northern front line. To the south, limited progress is made in liberating Yugoslavia and Romania, but Soviet confidence is lacking, and several opportunities to inflict decisive damage to the Germans and local defenders are missed. November to December 1944. The Eastern Front deteriorates into fractured conflicts. In the north, the Soviets maintain pressure on the Germans, with fighting heaviest around the embattled city of Warsaw. The intensity of the fighting effectively renders the city uninhabitable, but its symbolism as Poland's capital means neither Hitler nor Stalin will let the other seize it. In a small rerun of Stalingrad, the opposing armies settle into a brutal close-quarters battle. To the south, the battles for Hungary and Yugoslavia and the Baltics are deteriorating into local power struggles between isolated German forces and their local allies, pro-communist resistance fighters and anti-communist militias backed covertly by the US. The front line becomes difficult to discern, and the resistant fighters battle each other almost as much as their enemies. The Germans consolidate their positions in northern Norway, having defeated the Finnish efforts to prevent them from escaping Finland. Soviet frustrations at the poor performance of the Finnish military threatened to destabilize the Soviet-Finnish ceasefire. January 1945, the Soviet High Command, under direct orders from Stalin, attempts to encircle Warsaw and cut off the German defenders. Conscious of their failure to do so at Stalingrad and the subsequent escape of the German 6th Army, the Soviet commanders dither and their plans are captured by the Germans. Romania turns on its German allies in the face of overwhelming Soviet might, but realizes too late that the Soviets are likely to be no better friends. Nevertheless, the Romanian forces capitulate to the Red Army and move to the Hungarian border to assist the Soviet advance on Hungary. February to March 1945, the Soviet encirclement of Warsaw is launched and immediately falters in the face of prepared German defensive positions. Concentrated anti-tank weaponry decimates the leading Soviet tank regiments, and at night the German super soldiers, the Schreckwaffen, wreak havoc amongst the Soviet positions. In many places, Soviet infantry desert in massive numbers, with their officers either dead or unable to stop them. By the end of March, the Soviets have advanced around Warsaw, but have failed to link up and isolate the city. With morale at a worryingly low levels, the Soviet armies halt to consolidate, allowing the weary Germans time to bolster their defenses and prepare for the next assault. Part of this resupply includes heavy armored suits designed and powered using new technology from the Rift. April to May 1945. With improving weather, the Soviets renew their offensive but make little headway against the German positions. In the south, the US-backed anti-communist partisans caused chaos in Romania and Yugoslavia, attacking logistical routes and supply depots and hampering Soviet operations against Hungary. Combined with Romanian forces' unwillingness to fight, the Soviet invasion of Hungary is delayed, giving Germany time to assist Hungary with its defenses. June to July 1945. German counterattacks incorporate the latest Riftec weapons, have some success in forcing the Soviet forces from the outskirts of Warsaw. Strange spherical turrets on German tanks unleash powerful bursts of energy that crush Soviet armor like paper. Fragile Soviet morale crumbles once again, forcing political officers to step in and crush any signs of weakness or dissent, lest it spread. The Soviet lines hold, but the fighting spirit of the Soviet army hangs but by a thread. August 1945. Massive efforts by the Soviet army force the Germans back from Warsaw. Soviet casualties are high, but some element of morale is restored as the Germans are found to be beatable once again. German forces hang on to the outskirts of Warsaw, but are cut off from their supply lines. Bitter fighting leaves both sides exhausted. The Soviet invasion of Hungary begins. Three large Soviet armies advance in prepared and determined defenses and suffer extremely high casualties. German Riftec weapons again prove a match for the Soviet numbers, although Soviet imitations of Germans' heavy infantry armor proves effective, if not somewhat crude. September to October 1945. The German army finally manages to force its way through to its beleaguered troops in Warsaw, opening a corridor just wide enough to allow the survivors to escape and move west. The first mass deployment of German heavy infantry is a quantifiable success, punching through Soviet defenses and rescuing the encircled troops in Warsaw. Working with the heavy infantry is a variant of the Spine Panzermech, equipped with a flamethrower, purpose-built for the ruble-strewn chaos of Warsaw streets. The arrival of Soviet heavy infantry is too late to stop the Germans from escaping. With the German army unable to pose a credible threat, Stalin turns his attention back to Finland. On 12 September 1945, the Soviets launch a concentrated invasion to Finland, now practically unarmed as part of the ceasefire agreement made with Russia just the year before. Unlike 1940, the Finns are in no position to resist the experienced and battle-hardened Soviet formations, and the country sues for peace by the end of October. The Soviet operation is not without its difficulties, and numerous instances of bravery and military fortitude leads to the creation of an active Finnish underground, which the Soviets accuse of being equipped by either the US and/or Germany. November 1945. The Soviet advance in Hungary sees the eastern part of the country fall to the Red Army. Although they pay dearly for every mile they advance, with Budapest under threat, the German High Command diverts resources from Italy to halt the Soviets in the south. The appearance of the fearsome Nachtjägers and the new tanks armed with gravity pulse weapons slow the Soviet advance to a crawl.